If you thought that we were through this little series, you were mistaken, because you know that I told you we're doing 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. This will require us to take a few more weeks. Today we are going to tackle the entire book of... I don't know how many times you've heard someone preach on, 2nd John, I said 1st John. 2nd John, I don't know how many times you've heard somebody... It certainly isn't often someone's choice, it seems. It's very rare. I don't think I have personally sat in a service and listened to someone ever expound on this passage. So this morning, you are going to hear the book in its entirety. It's fairly simple, it's fairly straightforward, but it is very profound. And it answers a very practical question that comes from 1st John, which we shall see. I've titled 2nd John, just for the sake of giving it a title, Love with Truth. You will see what I mean by that, hopefully, as things unfold. This is the theme of 2nd John, love and truth. This is, by the way, just a piece of trivia for you, but it is the second shortest book in the New Testament. It is only about, I think, 3 or 4 words longer than 3rd John, which is the shortest book of the New Testament. But at any rate, it has a profound message in regards to this subject of truth and love. Let's just lay out some definitions so we're all on the same page. These are words that have been batted around, and certainly words that have lost their meaning in our age in which we live. Let me just describe for you in a very brief way, in a simple way, as important as this is, we'll be brief about this. What is truth? Let's make sure we're all on the same page. What is truth? Truth is that which describes reality. Objective truth is truth that describes reality outside of yourself. There is such a thing as subjective truth. That is, you can describe reality that's for you. In other words, you can say, I like strawberries more than raspberries. That's a subjective truth, and that can be true for you. But not all truth is subjective truth. There is truth that is objective truth. That is to say, it's pointing to an object outside of yourself. So if I make the truth claim that God exists, that is not my opinion. That is a statement that I am seeking to make as a truth claim in an object outside of myself. I may believe that's true or not true, and whether I believe God exists or doesn't exist, it doesn't change whether or not he does or doesn't exist, if you're still tracking with me. Truth is a description of reality. That's all it is. It's very important that we understand this and remember this, because we are now living in an age that believes that truth cannot be found and cannot truly be known, and there really is no truth, and all truth is equal. That is a foolish notion. All truth can never be equal. Truths that contradict each other can never be the same truth. Truth is not self-determined. That is to say, you do not decide truth for yourself. You did not decide what red was. Red is predetermined before you were ever born. You did not decide that 2 + 2 is 4. That is not your opinion. That is something that has been decided. Truth is outside of you. It is not self-determined. It is something we discover. It is not something we invent. I say this to you because we live in an age where truth is always under attack, and we now live in an age where it has come to the point where we don't worry about what we believe being true. We believe what we believe makes us feel good. We make our truth claims in the world we live in based on our emotions, based on our feelings, based on how it makes us feel, based on our reaction to what we hear. It has nothing to do with grounded in objective reality. We have lost the moorings of what truth is in this culture. If you don't believe that, listen to how many times you hear the phrase, how does that make you feel? How do you feel about that? As if your feelings have some measure on whether or not what you are experiencing is true. Truth is a foundation on which the church builds all of what she believes. Objective truth. Not my opinion, but truth. Can it be defended? That's another issue. We'll not get into that. That's not what I'm about this morning. I'm seeking to keep my comments brief. Love is not an emotion. Again, this is a subject for which our culture seems to have every idea of what love is, and it has everything to do with your feelings. Love may be related to your feelings. Your feelings may motivate your reaction, but love is an action. Love is a choice. Love is a decision towards somebody else, regardless of your feelings. Feelings take the upper hand in the culture we live in. If you watch, my wife and I, do I dare admit this out loud? We're in the middle of this little curious series. It's in Spanish on Netflix. I even tell you this, that I would watch a little bit of this once in a while. There's this kind of soapy thing, and it's kind of making me roll my eyes because it's reached a point where it's lost my interest because it's starting to get unintelligent. Because what is happening is these two engaged people are starting to look, one woman is starting to look at another man, and that man is also engaged, and these two engaged people are starting to have feelings for each other, and I'm like, what is your deal? Does your whole world run on feelings? Is everything about what your emotion is? Don't you understand what commitment is? Don't you understand what love is? Love is a sacrifice to all other emotions. Love is a commitment to this person, but no, we live in a world where that's drama and that's excitement and this is how we feel, and so we have to watch them go through this roller coaster of, should I marry him? Should I marry her? What should we do? It's decided already, people, because love is not about your emotions. Love is a decision. Love is a reaction to, perhaps it's guided by emotions. I'll stop going on about it, but it kind of irritates me. This is the world we live in. And this is how we see God's love. The reason we point this out to you at the beginning is because this is the theme of 2 John. Why? Because this is the theme of 1 John. If you remember, there is constantly a push in 1 John for truth and love, and I'll point that out to you in just a few moments. Let me read the opening verses of 2 John, verses 1 to 3. Note how many times truth and love are mentioned. To the elder, to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth, and not only I, but also all who know the truth, because of the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, in truth and love. Now, this is a very typical first century greeting, how letters often begin, and you read other New Testament books with the exception of John's writings. 1 John doesn't start this way. The Gospel of John doesn't start this way. But many of the epistles, this is how they start. Who I'm writing to, who I'm writing, and give a greeting and a blessing. And John's greeting is saturated with his desire to express love and truth. These are the themes of this book. Why? Because these have been the themes of 1 John, and something, it appears, we're assuming now, but regardless if our assumption is correct, we still understand 2 John. We're guessing that 2 John is now a reaction to what 1 John said. Because 1 John, as you remember, was all about love. Love was an aspect of how the Christian needs to show their life and show that they have been born of the Spirit of God. By this we know love, 1 John 3:16, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. This is love. Love is seen in a sacrifice. Love is seen in Christ's reaction. And so we respond in love to others in the same sacrificial way. Love. 1 John 4:7-8, these famous verses. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. John is wrestling with, in 1 John, to point out how much the Christian church must exude love. He's also on the heels of this, also balancing this with truth. If you remember, 1 John is all about the fact that there are false teachers that have crept into the church, and they are teaching false ideas about Christ. Children, 1 John 2:18, it is the last hour, and as you may have heard, that Antichrist is coming. So now many Antichrists have come. Therefore, we know it is the last hour. This is not the final Antichrist, the capital A Antichrist we think of in regards to final things. This is just anybody who teaches against Christ. They're saying something that diminishes the person and the work of Christ. And this is the last hour. They have gone out there. They have left from us. They are teaching wrong things about Jesus. 1 John 2:26, I write these things to you about those who are, present tense, trying to deceive you. The book of 1 John is all about love and truth. Love each other, love each other, love each other. Watch yourself, be careful. There are false teachers teaching false things. So here comes the crux of 2 John. What do you do when you meet somebody who is teaching a false Christ, how do I love them? Do I slam the door in their face? Do I spit on them? Do I accept them? Do I greet them? What do I do when I meet somebody in my family, somebody in my situation, whatever the case? How do I treat them? How do you respond? Let me give you the synopsis of 2 John. We'll boil it all down after this slide. If you fall asleep and wake up, you'll still think you learned the entire sermon, because this is it in a boiled down nutshell. Here is the message of 2 John. We who love the truth and the person of Christ are not to lend aid, support, or encouragement to those who teach a false Christ, despise the truth, or his people. Truth balanced with love. How does truth and love coexist and coexist at the same time? In the world we live in, love always trumps truth. In the Christian worldview, it is a very, very thin line and a very careful line, but truth, in a sense, there's a sense in which you say truth trumps love. Tolerance is the buzzword of the age we live in, where if you are in any way not in complete 100% agreement that I can believe whatever I want, if you disagree with me on any level, you automatically hate me. That's basically the takeaway of the world that we live in. This is the world we live in, but this is the world that Christ has called us to live in. In spite of that fact, this is the message of 2 John. Let me explain it to you, how we reach this conclusion and how it makes sense at the end. Hopefully I'll be able to pull this apart for you. How do you respond to those who make a false claim to know Christ? How do you love them? So just a quick introduction here. I mentioned this already. The elder is this is the introduction to the book, but the elder referenced here is John himself. He never uses his name in any of his writings. In the gospel, he uses the name, he calls himself the other disciple, or sometimes he calls himself the disciple whom Jesus loved. But he never uses his own name. He doesn't mention his own name, and this is typical of 2 John. He doesn't do it in 1 John, he doesn't do it in 3 John, but we know that this book was written by John. He calls himself the elder. This is a position of not only age, but also position. So it's written to the elect lady. This is kind of an aside, but I wanted to take a bit of time with this because this has been a question that many people have asked when they come to 2 John. What is going on, and who is this person, and what is she about, and who are her children, and why is this written, and what is happening? So who is the elect lady? That is a very good question, and I wish I had a very good answer. But here's what I've got for you. We don't know. So we basically have broken this down into two major possibilities, and it's pretty much a 50-50 gamble who this is and what this is. The elect lady has often been seen as somebody who is just a generous person who is using her means to assist God's workers. It is entirely possible that this is a person who has opened her home to traveling evangelists. In the first century, there are no hotels. There is no infrastructure for you to go and book ahead and plan and get online and figure out what Expedia's got for you and work your schedule. That's not the case. You would travel without any way of telling anybody you're coming. You would show up in a particular town or city, and you would find somebody who wasn't a relative who would have some mercy on you and invite you and let you stay with them. This was a common practice in the first century, certainly amongst the Jewish people. The Christians also took it up. And so what happened when somebody from one church would travel to another church, the Christians would invite you into their home and you would stay with them. Hopefully not for an extended period, and hopefully you would have an exit date before you agreed to letting them stay there. But besides that, it appears, the guess is that this woman has asked a question to John. She's read 1 John, and now she is asking the question, what do I do when a false teacher comes to my door and wants to come into my boarding house and stay with me? What do I do with that? I'm supposed to love everybody. How do I react? That is entirely a possibility. If you read the book with the notion that she's asking this question, the book makes perfect sense with that thought. We don't know again for sure that this is the case. By the way, it says to the elect woman and her children. So some people have surmised that perhaps she runs an orphanage, or her husband's not mentioned. Maybe she just has a lot of children. Maybe the children are, a picture of all the people that are staying with her. Her name is not mentioned. It's thought maybe John is doing this to protect her from any persecution that might be coming. Some people have said that actually her name, in English we would translate it elect. Her name is there. Her name is eklekta, which is the Greek word for elect. I think that's a ridiculous notion in my opinion, but it is a feminine form of the word, and so it's just surmising. A lot of people like to say, or guess, or suppose, just for dragging this out and making you all the more bored, is that this is just a metaphor for the church. That in fact it's not a woman. The elect lady is in fact a house church. These are the people of God. The word church in Greek, which we don't do in English, is a feminine noun. We don't have feminine, masculine, neuter in English. They do in Greek. And so words that were feminine would be considered a she. A church is a her. The church is called the bride of Christ for this reason, because it's a feminine word. So maybe it's not anybody. I'm only telling you that because people have asked that. Maybe you're curious about this yourself, and so I just mention it and go on about it probably longer than I needed to. Let me just take one last thing and tell you this, because this is a little piece of information that you need to stick in your head and just hold on to this for the rest of your entire life. Are you ready for this? The plain things are the main things. That's all I want to say. When it comes to the Bible, if you find something like this and you're not sure what it means and you're not sure who that is, then it doesn't matter. If it's not explained, then don't get hung up on it. The plain things are the main things. The main things are the plain things. When you understand something and that is the main idea of the text. That's what the Bible's trying to say. Don't get hung up on details. They're interesting, they help us, but they're not the main point. Just to say that that's exactly what this is. It doesn't carry the message, but it does kind of fill in some of the blanks if you kind of understand that there's some possibilities that are going on here. So, having said all that, if I haven't bored you yet, let's carry on into the text, because there's only 13 verses and I can only drag this out for so long. Verse 4, just teasing. I rejoice greatly to find some of your children, again, are these the children of God who are in the house church? Are these literally her offspring? Take your pick. Some of your children walking in the truth, just as we were commanded by the Father. This is such a great expression, walking in the truth. Again, he points out how important it is to be grounded in objective reality, that the reality of who Christ is has now affected you. You have now heard this, and it's now caused you to respond to your life. It's not now a head knowledge of truth. It's caused you to walk, and he's using that picture of you moving your feet through your life and walking, as it were, and making decisions based on the truth. Sometimes people get ahead of the game, and they think truth is all that matters. We must always balance truth with love. If you don't know what I mean, perhaps you have seen people of the like who are spouting what you could say is, in essence, truth, but it is being done in such a way that it is bombastic, often cruel, that is often people do this as in a sense that they believe that somehow they are doing God a favor, that somehow they are denouncing, often in a public way. We don't always see this so much in this side of the border, but on the other side of the border, it's quite a common practice from what I understand. That's no slam on geography or nationalities. It's just a statement of reality of who we are as a culture, that it seems sometimes that people feel that they have the right to say something, and here's the rub. Often what is being said is technically true. But is it accurate to do something with the truth when it's not balanced with love? If you want an example of this, Acts chapter 16, verses 16 and following. This is jumping into a context. Luke writes, as we were going to the place of prayer, we were met by a slave girl who had a spirit of divination and brought her owners much gain by fortune-telling. She followed Paul and us, crying out, "These men are servants of the Most High God, and proclaim to you the way of salvation." Let's pause there. Is what she's saying true? Yes, it is. Is this an accurate statement of who Paul is and what Paul and his companions are about? They are servants of the Most High God and proclaim to you the way of salvation. Any problem with that? Verse 18. As she kept doing this for many days, Paul, having become greatly annoyed, turned and said to the Spirit, "I command you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her." And it came out that very hour. Now, what's his problem? It was free publicity. She was speaking the truth. But the truth in the mouth of a demon is still blasphemy. The source from which that truth comes deletes all that truth says. And you connect yourself, the truth has to be connected to itself, to a message that is coherent with truth. Truth must be seen saddled up to something which truth agrees with, and truth must always be done with love. Where love does not exist, truth cannot be proclaimed. If I'm making any sense, this is the essence of the crux of the matter in 2 John. Truth with love. But truth without love cannot exist, and love without truth cannot exist. You cannot just have pure tolerance without truth, and you cannot have truth without the balance of love. You don't see what I'm saying? Hopefully you will before we go too much further, because that is the crux of what we need to do this morning. I don't know if you've ever seen these kind of vandalistic routines. I think this is so incongruous. I find this quite irksome. I would call this, if you'll pardon my pun, evangelicism. It is an effort somehow to present something of Christ. Is there a truth that is illegally painted on public property? Does anybody have a problem with this? We should all have a problem with this, because it is done although there is a truth involved. Does anybody want to saddle up next to that truth and say, "I claim that I agree with spray painting on public property and defacing it"? You can't do that. So you have to now separate yourself from that truth. You have to separate yourself, because love and truth have to coexist. So you denounce this. "Oh, I agree that's true, but that's wrong." "But don't you love Jesus?" "Yes, but it's wrong. It doesn't make it right." And so here you have the problem. When somebody, now reverse that. When somebody now is preaching a false Christ, a false Jesus, and a false gospel, how do you respond to them? Do you now respond with love where there is no truth? You cannot respond with love. The love that would accept them is a love that negates truth. I hope I'm making sense, because I am to me. Verse 5. "Now I ask you, dear lady, not as though I were writing to you a new commandment, but the one that we've heard from the beginning, that we love one another." Just remember that. Love is the part of 1 John. He's not negating this. We must love one another. This is the commandment that he had from the beginning. It's you heard from Jesus. He states it in 1 John 2. "Beloved, I'm writing to you a new commandment, no new commandment, but an old commandment that you had from the beginning." The old commandment is the word that you heard. And then he heard this himself right from Jesus. John 13:34, a new commandment, Jesus is speaking, "A new commandment I give you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you are also to love one another. By this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." So, how do you apply love and truth in proper balance? When is it the loving thing? What is the loving thing to do when someone is preaching a different Christ and they're looking for assistance? How do you love them? Because we're told to love. We're told to love from the beginning. This is love. that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you've heard from the beginning. So we should walk in it. What is the commandment? What is the beginning in this? It's not only the beginning of Christ, but I think it goes back to the beginning of the Old Testament. Let me ask you this, class. What are the first 3 of the 10 commandments? How do you not know this? Number 1, there should be no other gods before me. Number 2, do not bow down to any, make no false images. Do not bow down to idols. Number 3, do not take the Lord's name in vain. Number 3, do not take the Lord's name in vain. Number 4, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. I asked you the first 3 and I gave you the first 4. What are all these related to? Love God, love God, love God, love God. What are the first 4 commandments? Love God so supremely there are no other gods. Love God so supremely that you don't make any false images of God. Love God so supremely that you protect his name, his reputation. You don't sully him. You don't bring him into any conversation. You don't bring his name down. You honor his name. You protect his person. Number 4, you honor him so deeply with your life that you set aside time through the week to worship and honor God. You love God. First commandment, love God with all your heart. What are the next 6 commandments? And your neighbor as yourself. This is the summary of all the commandments. Love God. And you can't love God when you accept a false truth about God. You can't be loving God and embracing a false idea about Christ. Because by embracing that false idea, you have just broken the 3rd commandment. You have broken the 2nd commandment. You have broken the 1st commandment. You have sullied the name of God. You have made a false image of God. You are now worshiping a God that doesn't exist. You have just embraced a false idea. If you're going to obey the commandments, which we heard from the beginning, which is loving God, you must love God in truth. And truth means you have to sometimes draw a line between truth and error. This is a challenge for us in the world we live in, where we have made it a virtue to feel the higher moral ground is to embrace everybody who speaks about any Christ at all, and that we are obligated to love and accept them, when in fact this is the teaching of 2 John. There needs to be at times a line in the sand. I need to clarify all of this, but just so you understand, this is where the book goes. I'm just explaining the book to you. That's my task this morning. For many deceivers, verse 7, many deceivers, so he's talked about love. Remember the commandment to love, but here's verse 7. Many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. Such a one is the deceiver and the antichrist. This was beginning in the New Testament church, and it is still around today, and I don't need to tell you that it's still around today. There are false teachers that teach false ideas about the true Jesus. I mentioned this last week to you. First century idea was a philosophy called Gnosticism, which kind of still exists today, but it's kind of undercover. It has to do with secret truth, and it had no interest in physical, literal reality truth. Their interest in Christ was a philosophical and mystical one, not grounded in history, not grounded in reality, not grounded in truth. They believed in some Jesus that was going to, take you to some higher plane. And at the center of their teaching, they taught what we would call docetism. It comes from the word doeko, which means to appear, to something that looks like something. This is what they taught, that all material matter is evil, only the spiritual is good. So they would have taught that God would have never come in the flesh, God would never have become a person, because of physical things are evil. All that matters is the spiritual realm. And so what I do in my body, as I sin, as I do things, I can't help that, doesn't really matter because it's my body. It's not my spirit that's being affected. They had all these excuses on why you can live in more immorality and all the rest. And so John writes 1 John and responds, if you keep on sinning, you don't know Christ. You don't get it. You can't just go on doing what you want to do and still claim to know Jesus. You can't now manipulate and change who Jesus is and still claim to know Jesus. This was his wrestling. There are false teachers who are claiming that Jesus is not a physical person, which, by the way, if we don't have a physical person, we don't have a cross that redeems us from our sin. So he warns them, watch yourselves so that you may not lose what we have worked for. Don't listen to these people, but may win a full reward. Everyone who goes on ahead and does not abide in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. Stay your ground. That's the message of 1 John. Stay your ground. Everyone who goes on ahead, everyone who thinks it's fun to race ahead, I think I've got some new thing, I've got some fancy thing. They're not abiding, they're not staying. Be warned, they're all our false teachers. Now, just a word of warning for those who sometimes get innovative with their beliefs. Sometimes you hear ideas. I just want to say this so we're balanced this morning, because it's easy to hear what I say without 50 questions that go unanswered. Not every matter that we meet somebody is a point of division or a point of being upset with them. Okay? I think you understand that, but I just wanted to say that out loud. We're not talking about some narrow, pin-headed point of view that doesn't allow for some measure of understanding that we've got some wiggle room, if you want to say that. There are points, let me just say politely, baptism for one. I'm not going to wrestle with a Presbyterian. I think they're wrong, but I'm not going to say you can't be a believer. I'm not going to tell them you can't possibly know Christ. I'm not going to possibly say your church is completely not a church because of some point of doctrine. I disagree with that, but it's a point at which we have room, allow ourselves to disagree. Just pointing that out. Where do you know the line? When it is a fundamental truth on the person of Christ. What do you believe about Jesus? Is he the Son of God? Is he God incarnate? Did he die for your sins? Is the only means of you being reconciled to a holy God? Is he the means of satisfying God's justice for you? Is he your substitute? Whatever your conversation, whatever your words, that bottom line point of reference. Jesus. If we can agree, if you begin to teach a false idea, if you begin to say he's some great guru, who takes us to a higher level, you start to get weird about Jesus, I start to back off. We need to separate ourselves. There's a problem. Not every false idea, if you want to say it that way, is a point of division. Here's the big question. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house. Now, back to our first point. Who is this woman? Is it the church? Is it her physical house? Or is it a house church? You can read it either way. Do not receive him into your house church. Do not receive them into your house. Do not invite them in or give any greeting. For whoever greets him takes part in his wicked works. Now, on the surface, this sounds like we're saying, don't say hello. Don't even talk to these people. Don't even have a conversation with these people. That's not what this text is saying. I know that's what looks like what this text is saying. That's not what this text is saying. I'm not trying to soft pedal it. I'm trying to help you understand it. I find myself even wondering if I'm getting boring this morning, so I better stop talking. Let me get this done. Take a breath. The word greets here is an odd use of a word. It is a Greek word that means rejoice. It's a very strange place to put this. Do not give him any means to rejoice, for whoever rejoices with him takes part in his wicked works. Whoever agrees with him, whoever sees this person, and in essence what he's saying is, whoever here's a person who's teaching a false truth, and whoever comes alongside them and says, hey, we're buddies. Hey, my truth can live with your truth. Hey, why don't we get along together? Why don't we greet each other in some way that we show that we are compatible? That's what he's saying. Don't do anything in such a way that the truth is sullied with the false truth. This doesn't mean that if a Jehovah's Witness comes to your door, you shouldn't you should slam the door in their face. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't even invite them in. This is another word of warning. This does not imply that you have the right or a need for us to be rude or disrespectful. That's not what this is saying. It is saying we should never allow the truth to be saddled up against anything that is a false idea. Do not even greet it. Do not even allow it. Don't even let it come into your home. Don't embrace it. Don't give it the time of day. It doesn't mean the people who are promoting this should be slapped in the face or should be disregarded or considered to be less than human. It has nothing to do with people. It has everything to do with truth. Do I have much to write to you? I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk face to face so that our joy may be complete. The children of your elect sister greet you. This is how 2 John ends. What is the essence of this book? Love the truth. The truth needs to be defended. The truth needs to be honored. The truth needs to be held up. The truth needs to be made sure that it's presented clearly. The truth matters. We are people of the truth. Tolerance is the age that we live in. Tolerance is the buzzword that has this veneer of love, but it actually negates truth, negates the need to be careful and parsing what is true and what is false, because truth is not a matter of opinion. It is based in reality. And if Jesus is the Son of God, then we have nothing but to promote and present him that way. We cannot be sidling up against some false ideas about Jesus. This is the book of 2 John.